Hello and welcome to the Operators Association podcast. This is Greg, your Director of Athletics, and today I'm doing part 5 of the 6-part Hero's Journey podcast series. So at the end of the 4th podcast, we finished up with graduating buds. Now today for this 5th episode, I'm going to take you through SQT, which stands for SEAL Qualification Training. SQT is roughly 9 months long, 8 or 9 months. And it begins at the end of graduating buds. And you're not officially a SEAL until you graduate SQT. At the end of SQT is when you actually get your trident, you get pinned, and then you get assigned to a SEAL team. Now, right off the bat, there's a big difference between SQT and buds. In buds, you are doing the baseline fundamentals. So you're learning the fundamentals of diving, being a combat swimmer. You are learning the fundamentals of shooting, of demolition, of land nav, and that's probably about it. When you get to SEAL qualification training, you're going to expand those skill sets. You're going to continue to build upon them. You're going to get many new skill sets. In SQT, you'll do more weapons training. You'll do small unit tactics training, more land nav, more demo. You'll do cold weather training up in Alaska. You'll get TCCC or Tactical Combat Casualty Care, that's medical training. You'll do more MAROPS and small boat training. You'll go to jump school, both static line and military freefall. You'll go to SEER, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape. It's like simulating being a prisoner of war. You'll do land warfare, CQC, which stands for Close Quarters Combat. You also hear CQB fairly often, Close Quarters Battle. You'll do a combatives block, which is just fighting. So there's a lot of different blocks and skill sets throughout SQT. So it's impossible to go into detail on all of these within a 1-hour podcast. But I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights, some of the more memorable training blocks and events for me. And if you guys have questions or want to hear more about a specific training block, bring them to the next Q&A session, which I believe is November 8th. So right off the bat, besides just the skill sets and the physical schedule of what you'll be doing, a huge difference between buds and SQT is the mentality and how you are treated. So buds is basically 6 months long of getting kicked in the nuts. Buds is hard, and you as a person will be hard during buds. It's just a very tough Spartan atmosphere, and you definitely watch what you say around the instructors the entire time. SQT, I certainly would not call it a gentleman's course, but the mindset shifts where instructors are not looking to punish you the whole time. You are still a student and you're not a SEAL yet, so certainly don't go into SQT thinking that you've made it and you're good to go. You show respect and you do all the things that you would typically do. But you're not. The instructors are not looking to crush you the whole time. You can ask questions. You can have a dialogue back and forth. It's much more of a peer-to-peer relationship than you had in buds, where that power differential is very high. Because when you have that huge power differential and guys are constantly nervous about making a mistake, nervous to ask questions, they're just waiting to get beat, which is sometimes the case in buds. It's not very conducive. It's not a good environment for learning. And the point of SQT is learning. You're developing new skills as well as building and improving upon those fundamentals that you built during buds. At this point in the pipeline, you graduated buds. They know you're tough. They know you're not going to quit. Now it's time to actually begin teaching you and making you a little bit dangerous so you bring something to the table when you get to a team. So one of the first trips in SQT is cold weather training up in Kodiak, Alaska. Now, I know they shuffle the order of these events around. When I was in SQT, that was the first trip that you did. Now it's one of the last ones, so the order is different, but all the same blocks still. So Alaska is absolutely one of the highlights of SQT in my book. It is such a cool trip. You spend 3+ weeks up on Kodiak Island, which is off the coast of Alaska, and you're really just working on more land navigation. You're learning basic cold weather tactics. You're learning about how your clothing works, which sounds funny, but is very useful knowledge that I didn't know shit about. You're learning basic survival skills. You're learning to live out of your ruck. And overall, it's an awesome time. If you like being outdoors, you're going to love Alaska. There's an awesome compound up there. There's recently new built barracks. There's a large indoor rock climbing wall where you do some rappelling. You learn a lot about rappelling. They have a great gym up there, good little galley kitchen area. It's definitely a good setup. And like a lot of military trips that take you to remote destinations, it's a great time to get to know your classmates really well, to have fun with the boys, and there's no distractions, right? There's not too many places out in town where you're going to go. It's a lot of hanging out around the compound, hanging out in the kitchen, sitting on the couches there watching TV, going to the gym with guys. So it's a good time. Now, the time of year that you go to Alaska will heavily impact your experience. So some guys go in the summer, and it's truly like a good time camping trip. You can go in the middle of winter and have a ton of snow up there. I was kind of middle of the road. I got there at the beginning of March. So we had snow at the beginning, and then it was melting while we were there. It's kind of a shitty time to be there just because you can get a lot of that cold rain, right, where it's too warm to snow, but it's still not very warm, where it's about 40 degrees and raining. That's not ideal weather. But I still had an absolute blast up there. Now, if you go during the summertime, when I was there in March, the bears were just waking up. But Kodiak grizzly bears are the largest bears in the world. And as the name suggests, they are located on Kodiak Island, this one little island located off of Alaska. So while you're hiking, while you're land navving around, you'll always carry your canister of bear spray with you. I did not see a grizzly bear in person. I was pretty disappointed by that. They were just waking up from hibernation when we got up there. But those bears are absolutely massive, and people definitely have close encounters during the summertime when you're out. You're kind of always near water sources up there, and the bears are all over the island. So that's something really cool to look forward to. If you're there in the winter, you'll get the snow. You're not going to get the grizzly bears. Doing land nav in Alaska is so much fun just because the scenery up there is incredible. You do your land nav on the east coast in general of Kodiak Island, and it's pretty mountainous terrain. You're going up and down, but whenever you're on high ground, you can always see the coast. You can see the water. There's sometimes when we were actually walking down on the beaches for land nav, kind of the rocky coast. And there's all different terrain. There's some rolling hills, kind of meadows. There are large mountains. There are pine forests. And then a lot of the forests, there's this pretty bright green moss that covers, in some areas, covers absolutely everything. It looks like there are some areas that you get to up there where it looks like you're in a fairy tale. There's these tall spruce trees everywhere, and the entire ground, large part of the trees, everything is covered in this spongy, bright green moss. It's kind of surreal. You can lose your sense of direction in there. Now, that moss also happens to work really well for, in layman's terms, hiding spots. Essentially, if you are on E&E or escape and evasion, there are plenty of times during the Alaska trip when you need to build a layup site or you need to not be caught by instructors. This moss is incredible at allowing you to completely disappear, really, if you dig something out underneath it and then replace that moss back over the top of your shelter. It's like throwing a camouflage blanket over the top of your shelter. It really just disappears. The Alaska trip can kind of be broken into 4 segments or 4 quarters. First thing when you get there is learning about your gear, learning about your clothing systems, how they work, how you should actually wear them, how you pack your ruck. So you learn about all these things. You go out on an overnight camping trip, and you get experience packing your ruck. Deciding what to wear. You go up to elevation. You go up even if there's no snow anywhere else, you'll go to the top of this mountain and sleep up there where there's most likely going to be snow. During that time, you'll do a rewarming drill also where you'll go jump in a river. Essentially, the whole class will go into a river, and they'll keep you there for about 10 minutes until you drop your body temperature down a little bit. and then you use your gear. You go get in your sleeping bag, get in your tent, get your stove going, heat up something, drink some sort of warm liquid, and just good practice in case you fall into the water, in case something happens where you get wet, you need to rewarm yourself. So once you have that baseline of how your gear works and kind of how to be safe in cold weather, you go into land nav. Now, land nav is really nothing new. It's awesome doing it up there, as I mentioned before, just because of how beautiful the scenery is. After land nav, you go into basic survival skills. So you learn about this, you learn about some stuff in the classroom at the compound, you practice building shelters, and then you'll go out to, I don't know the name of the island, some smaller island off the coast of Kodiak it's just known as Survival Island or Survivor Island. You get dropped off on this island with no food with you. You're searched to make sure you don't bring any food. You just get dropped off at one end of the island. You have to make your way down to the other end of the island over the course of several hours. You have to do that tactically, as if you're on E&E, escape and evasion. And there are instructors out on the island looking for you as you navigate from one end to the other. Once you get to that other end, the link-up spot, you link up with the rest of your squad. Your movement across the island is as an individual. Then you link up with the rest of your squad there, and it transitions into a roughly 3-day survival type scenario where you and your squad build a shelter, you build a fire, and you live off of you live off of whatever you catch. Now, again, this is only 3 days, so it's not that big of a deal. You can easily not catch anything and just not eat for 3 days, right? It's not that long. But you also, it's not like you have nothing, right? You don't bring in any food, but you have a survival kit you have fishing hooks, fish lines, snare wire. If you want to get froggy, you can absolutely catch some fish, catch a rabbit, knock yourself out. Now, easier than actually catching game is foraging. Right, a lot of guys will go down to the coast, they'll go down to the tide pools, and they'll forage for all different shellfish and other things that wash up and get stuck in the tide pools. And it's fairly easy to just collect a bunch of those in a pot and come back and just boil a pot full of water and your shellfish, whatever little critters you forage for down there. In general, in any survival scenario, boiling your meat or your food is usually the best bang for your buck just because you don't lose anything. Whereas if you were to cook something over an open fire, say if the fat is dripping off into the fire, there's a lot of ways you can lose food, where if you just put something in water, boil it, and then you just drink the whole thing like a soup or a stew, it's impossible to lose any nutrients out of there. I digress. So at some point, they'll show you they'll probably field strip a rabbit, field strip a deer, whatever the instructors catch and kill up there. They'll show you guys how to do that. That's Survivor Island in a nutshell. It's nothing crazy. It's not an event to fear or to dread. It's fine. It's a good experience. It's fun. And then the culmination exercise at the end of Alaska, you do what's called the CSX. I believe it's a culmination skills exercise, sometimes referred to as the cold shitty exercise. But I love the CSX. I actually had a ton of fun. I know the class immediately before us had a completely different experience just because of their weather. They were miserable. It was about 33 degrees and raining the whole time, and they froze every night. But we didn't have that problem, and I had an awesome squad. I love the guys that we were working with. Our squad crushed it the whole time, so it was a blast. Now, the CSX is probably about 4 or 5 days long. It's an event. It's a one-way hike, essentially. It's doing land nav from one spot of the island. All along, you plan out your route, and you're going to another spot of the island. Sounds simple, but it's not like you're starting and ending at the same point each day. It's a continuous trek, and you're camping every night along the way. And there's also multiple checkpoints every day where you'll check in, you'll see the instructors, and you'll do some sort of tactical challenge. Now, it's nothing crazy. It's not like a combat shooting course. All these things are cold weather related skill sets that you learned up there. Or it might be something like reprogramming a radio, but it could be a river crossing, it could be rappelling down a cliff, it could be rigging up some sort of rope harness. So you're doing this with your squad. There's 4 squads in total, in our class at least, could be different depending on your numbers. And this whole thing is a competition. So the whole thing is you don't know exactly what it's graded on. We assume that speed is one of the factors, right? If we get there before anyone else, that's a good sign. How you perform in these daily challenges or competitions is obviously important. And there's also a tactical nature of this where in the past doing land nav, you were just hiking essentially. And now when you get to Alaska, land nav becomes slightly more tactical. It's not like land warfare patrolling all out. But throughout the CSX at least, if you're coming up to the instructors to do a station, an easy way to put it would be you want to see them before they see you. So if the instructors are sitting there, they shouldn't just see a gaggle fuck of students walking along the peak of a ridge and wander right up to them. You're starting to move and decide routes that are a little bit more tactical than just the average hiker in his neon blue Patagonia jacket. So a good example of this during the CSX, it was kind of weird at the beginning because the instructors don't give you strict guidance on how to approach them for these challenges. So you're just out there, you're doing your kind of tactical land nav, and then they want to see you to come in to do rappelling, to program your radio, whatever it is. But when the first couple of days, we would walk up to them and they would kind of be pissed that we weren't tactical coming up. And we're like, well, this is kind of an administrative break in training because we need to approach you to talk to you and check in and do our challenge. So what do you mean? And so they did that once, twice, maybe a third time, and we kind of got pissed off and said, all right, fuck it. We're going all in on this. So the next day, we were coming up on what we knew was going to be a checkpoint area. And we saw the instructors from probably about 600 meters away. We were coming up to a road crossing, and we were at a bend in the road where if we had crossed the road at that point, they would watch us come up to them the whole time. And look, they give you the coordinates where they're going to be, so they know where you're coming from, where your last point was. So they know in general what direction you're coming from. So it's, the game kind of plays into their favor. But we said, all right, fuck it, we're going all in here. So once we saw them down the road, again, this is from pretty far off, probably 600 meters, we said, all right, roger that, we're not crossing the road here. So we backtracked our steps about half a mile, went much farther down the road, crossed it farther away, had to cross over a river twice to do that. And then once we were on the other side of the road, we got into some real low ground, kind of handrailing this river, and walked until what we approximated was right behind where the instructor staff was. So myself and one of our recce guys just did a little 2-man point PL recce and went up there real quietly. And there was this berm. So we're in the woods. When you come out of the woods, there's a berm, probably 10 feet high, a dirt berm. And then immediately on the other side of this berm is the AMBU, or the instructor ambulance, and the instructors kind of set up in their folding chairs doing whatever. And in front of them is the road. So from the other direction where we first saw them, it was the road, little dirt strip on the side of the road where all the instructors are parked, berm behind them, and then the woods behind that. So we're now behind them coming up from the woods. So my recce guy and I realized that we're right behind them, right where we want to be. So we silently go back, get the rest of our squad, and we bring them up. Everybody on line, right, meaning just one straight horizontal line at the base of the berm, and just silently put my fingers up. 1, 2, 3, and on the count of 3, there were 9 little SQT students coming up, rifles up, everybody on line coming over the berm, screaming. And what I'll always remember is one of the At the time, one of the quietest guys in our squad was just starting to come out of his shell. There's a chief warrant officer who's in charge of training up there at the CW04. And this quiet guy in our squad is coming over the berm, screaming, "Put your fucking hands up, motherfucker!" Yelling this at the warrant officer. So we were dying laughing about that later that night. But it was pretty sick, actually. The instructors loved it. The warrant officer loved it. We legitimately scared the shit out of them. They were probably 5 feet away from that dirt berm when we crested over the top of it, and they had no idea anyone was within a mile of them. So they were happy with that. That ultimately led to us winning the CSX at the end. And after that event, we had a couple more kind of cowboy moves like that where the instructors would come by in a vehicle, in an ATV or something, trying to meet up with us to deliver a message, to do something kind of administratively. But we would, we'd hear them coming and be off the road and be performing vehicle interdictions, all shit that we certainly didn't actually know what we were doing. We hadn't learned this. We hadn't had land warfare yet. We hadn't had CQB. Hadn't been taught the tactics for any of this, but, we had our rifles and we knew the basic L ambush, so we just decided our squad was a bunch of cowboys and we weren't going to take any shit the rest of the CSX, and we had a lot of fun doing it. So I'll wrap up Alaska because we're 22 minutes in, and that's the only block I've spoken about so far. Land warfare is fun in SQT. Land warfare is a cool block. Won't spend a ton of time on that because it's similar to third phase and BUDS, which we discussed. So you do land warfare out in Nyland, California, which is just the middle of the desert in inland California. Now, two things that are very new and different from BUDS is, one, you're using optics in land warfare. This is the first time shooting with optics on. In BUDS, you're shooting all iron sights on your rifle, on your pistol. When you get to land warfare, is the first time shooting through glass. Usually you're going to use, on your M4, if you're just using the M4, you're going to use either an LCAN out there, which is a 4x scope. It's either a true 1x, which is a 0 zoom, or a 4x zoom. Good scope, super durable, also super heavy, but very reliable. And then for CQB, you're usually going to use an EOTech, which are great. EOTech, you can put a 3x magnifier also on there. The guys usually have. You just roll it out of the way when you don't want to use it, and then if you're somewhere at distance, you can flip it up and you have a 3x zoom. So using optics is fun. The second thing that you didn't do in BUDS is shooting at night. Now, shooting at night is kind of funny because you practice the fundamentals so much and you have this great posture and shooting stance and all these fundamentals, your trigger squeeze, everything that you've been practicing to be as accurate as you can and as fast as you can shooting and have great technique. Now, when you shoot at nighttime, basically all of that is out the window because at nighttime, you're using nods and you're using infrared lasers. So instead of looking through your optics or looking down your iron sights, whatever it is, you're just pointing your laser, and it's point and shoot, really. So you can, if you want to, you can literally shoot from the hip. Now, if you're shooting a lot, obviously I wouldn't recommend that. You want your buttstock on your shoulder. You want to be in a good firing position to absorb the recoil, etc. But the point is, you're not looking down your sights. You just have a laser at the end of your gun. You point your laser what you want to shoot at, and you pull the trigger. And if your laser is dialed in, then that's what you hit. So it's a little bit of an ironic realization, right? Because you spend so much time shooting, dialing in your shooting abilities. You think about it, and you're like, well, shit, we're always going to operate at night. Now, obviously, things happen. You go out there in the daytime sometimes, or an operation goes long, you're out there in the daytime. People get into firefights during the daytime all the time. But if everything goes well in a true soft mission, we're always fighting unfair and stacking the deck in our favor, and we're going to fight at night. So it's kind of funny when you realize for the first time, wow, all of the shooting we're doing is really not that applicable at nighttime. The weapons manipulation is, for sure. That's huge at night. But your accuracy, you turn your laser on and point and shoot. So those are the main takeaways, main big differences at land warfare. You also do much more tactics than you did in BUDS as far as movements, different sort of break contact, assault, flanking maneuvers, all different squad-sized or platoon-sized maneuvers in a land warfare setting. Plus, you get to shoot all different sorts of weapons. You'll shoot some heavy machine guns. You'll shoot dual 240s. You'll shoot 50 cals. You'll shoot some Law rockets. You'll shoot a Carl Gustav, which is not a rocket, actually. It's ironically, it seems like the biggest rocket we have, but it's technically a recoilless rifle. Made by Saab, interestingly enough. What you probably know is a car company. Makes military weapons. Fun fact for you. But yeah, it's land warfare. Shooting guns. It's fun. Now, CQC, Close Quarters Combat, was one of my favorite blocks. One of my favorite things that we did in the military. I loved CQC. Because CQC is almost like math. That probably doesn't sound appealing to a lot of you out there, but it's like a puzzle. It's all mental processing and developing your brain to read rooms. So you start off, you learn the fundamentals extremely well, and you just build upon the fundamentals. You build upon them, you build upon them until you get more and more advanced scenarios, and you can walk into any room and process it relatively quickly. There's always a correct way to process a room. And now as you get good, there might not be only one way, right? There might be multiple correct ways to do the same room. But you have to be decisive. You have to display really good body language so that your teammates can see what you're doing, what threats you're holding on, and they know which way you're prosecuting the room so that they can play off of you, essentially. When you first start CQC, you're going to have a lot of very strict rules. There's going to be specific distances where you're supposed to be at all times. For example, when you're outside of a door before you make entry, you want your barrel 12 inches off the threshold of the door, pointed at the crack of the door where it's going to open from. When you open the door or when your partner opens the door, there's a specific footwork, depending on which way you're going, of how you're going to step through the threshold of the doorway into the room. And then depending on if you're doing a 4-man entry or a 2-man entry, there's a specific distance down the wall where you need to be. There's a distance that your left foot needs to be, that your right foot needs to be, and then that your center line needs to be. You're going to start your sweep from your corner of the room if you're one of the first two guys in on a 4-man entry, or if it's only a 2-man entry. You'll present to your corner, then you're going to sweep to 12 inches off the potential barrel of your buddy's weapon. So that means regardless of where your buddy is in his scan of the room, if he was pointed straight out, your sweep goes till 12 inches off of where his muzzle would be. So you have all these very strict rules at the beginning that teach you the fundamentals. You're also going to communicate a lot at the beginning. So if you want to move off of your working wall, that initial wall that you made entry on, you're going to essentially request permission from your buddies with a moving move call. So I would say moving, which is requesting permission, and then my buddy will say move, which allows me to move off of that initial working wall. You'll be making a couple other different commands. You'll be giving all clear calls and numerous other things. And as you progress from the fundamentals, as you get better, eventually you want to do CQC without having to talk, right? Eventually you want to do this totally silently, where you're just reading off of each other and you know exactly what your buddies, what your teammates are doing, and you don't need to speak to each other. Now that's scenario dependent. If there's already been shots fired in the house, then there's really no harm in talking at that point. But in general, we work at night. We like to be sneaky. If you don't need to blow the door off, if it's not locked, you just open the back door and slide in, right? You want to be as quiet as possible. So you get better and better at it. You'll advance, and then you'll advance at your team. And if you ever go to one of the tier 1 units, those guys really specialize in CQC, and they'll take it 10 steps, 20 steps further than you did at your original team. Those guys are able to legitimately run through the house. But yeah, I loved CQC. I felt like it was, when I was in my block of CQC, I remember thinking, this is exactly what I joined the military to do. I loved the mental aspect of it, figuring out, it was just a challenge to figure out exactly the right way to do every room. And you're always heavily scrutinized by any little mistakes you make. The instructors are up in the rafters, so they're literally directly on top of you looking down. When you're in one of these shoot houses, they don't have either they don't have a roof at all, so the instructors are up there, or they just have a higher roof, but then there's rafters where the instructors can look down on you from above. So obviously they're not in the line of fire, and they can see exactly what you do inside the rooms. So they'll be heavily scrutinizing you for any possible tiny, slight safety infraction or violation. And it's the house is a high-pressure, high-performance environment, and I love that. Now, during CQC, you also do a ton of shooting at the range. So typically, a very common typical CQC schedule is if you're divided into two groups, one group will be at the range in the morning, the other group will be at the house, and then you'll switch in the afternoon. So every day you'll do half of your day inside the house actually doing CQC, and the other half of your day you're going to spend at the range. Now, when I say the range, it's different from when you're at land warfare. You'll go to the range, and that will be an outdoor range where you have increments. Say you have a berm every 100 meters. So you'll shoot from 100 meters would be the closest, and 200, 300, 400, 500, etc. When you go to the range during CQC, again, could be indoor or outdoor, but the farthest you're going to be shooting is maybe 50 meters. A lot of your shooting is going to be done from the 3 meter and the 5 meter and the 7 meter lines. Now, some of you at home might have hunting backgrounds, might have shooting backgrounds, and might sound ridiculous to you. Like, why would I shoot anything from 3 meters? But I think that's a stupid question. That is exactly where we operate, and that's exactly what you should be training. Now, obviously, what you're training is just changes, right? You're not shooting for accuracy. It's not like some people not in the military will go to the range, and even if they're shooting from 25 yards, they'll shoot a spot on a target, and they'll lie there for 3 minutes and try to keyhole that same bullet hole that they shot, or try to hit this tiny, tiny target. This is not precision competition shooting, right? You put up a silhouette, and you're trying to hit a human silhouette, essentially. So when you're training at 3 yards, at 5 yards, at 7 yards, you're working your weapons manipulation, you're working on your draw from your pistol holster, you're working your shot, the speed of your shot from your high ready or low ready rifle stance. You're working on your combat reloads for both pistol and rifle. You're learning how to clear malfunctions and get your gun back up online. You're learning the transition from your rifle to your pistol. Because if you're in the house and either your rifle goes dry or your rifle has a malfunction, you're not going to fix that malfunction at that proximal range, right? You have to drill it into your head where as soon as you pull the trigger and your gun goes click instead of bang, I instantly put that down and am drawing my pistol and I'm shooting with my pistol. Now, once a room is clear, that you've cleared with your pistol, maybe you get to the back of the stack and you pick up your rifle, you get it back online. But if you're trying to take shots with your rifle and it doesn't shoot, that is certainly not the time to look at your rifle and see what's wrong with it. So there are a million different aspects to combat shooting that are all very important and much, much, much more important than, minute, irrelevant accuracy, right? If I hit my own bullet hole, if my shots at a target are 2, 3, 5 millimeters off, it doesn't matter at all. If they're all going into somebody's chest, if they're an inch apart or 3 inches apart or in the same spot, really doesn't matter. I would much rather be able to put 5 shots in an 8-inch diameter circle within 2 seconds than I would be able to put 2 shots through the exact same hole over the course of 10 seconds, right? That does me no good in a combat scenario. So moral of the story, CQC is great. You finally really feel like a team guy. You're shooting, you're learning how to clear houses, clear buildings, and it's a good time. SEER School. I feel like a lot of people have heard of SEER. Stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast. It's essentially simulating getting captured or becoming a prisoner of war. SEER School, I think it lasts 2 or 3, I think it's 3 weeks actually. It's funny, all you really remember about SEER School is the FTX, the final training exercise, which happens at the end, which is only, 3 days long. That's what I always think of when you mention SEER school. But it's actually about 3 weeks long, and the first 2 weeks are essentially a classroom portion where you're learning things. And those 2 weeks are actually cool. You're learning, in theory, you're learning cool skills like how to pick handcuffs and how to resist interrogation and all sorts of things like that. But inevitably, you get to the shitty part, which is the 3-day actual exercise when you simulate being a POW or a hostage. And I think it has shifted more towards terrorism situations or a hostage rather than old school conventional war POW. So what that fun scenario looks like is a lot of bags over your heads, a lot of time in a small box-like cell, a lot of being naked. I think I was totally naked for most of it. Don't completely remember. A lot of very obnoxious soundtracks being played while you're in your cell, not eating anything, and a lot of getting smacked in the face by some huge motherfuckers. I don't know where they find these guys, but the instructors that they find for SEER school, some big old mountain men, usually some kind of Eastern European looking dudes. Pretty sure one of their names was Boris, and he looked exactly like a Boris. I remember that. And these guys just have hands like Belgian waffles, right? But not as soft. Could probably palm 2 basketballs per hand. And these guys just enjoy smacking the shit out of you. That's really the only one physical thing they can do. They can kind of push you against the wall, which does nothing. You don't mind that at all, and they can smack you. And they can smack you pretty hard, but that's about it. A lot of time sitting in a box, they'll pull you out, they'll try to interrogate you, and you learn these different techniques of, it's nothing complicated whatsoever. It's essentially, you give them a little bit, but you don't give them everything. You don't really give them any meaningful information. They don't encourage lying, right? Because you forget what you get into trouble lying. You can be found out pretty easily. You just kind of drip feed them information very slowly. You make them peel back the layers of the onion one at a time. You don't just offer everything at once off the bat. And throughout that whole thing, you're make sure they're seeing you as a human, and they're hopefully sympathizing with you, and you're trying to buy time and to get status updates on your other teammates, how they're doing. You're trying to look out for their health, for your own health, get food and water, all of the kind of basic things. Not very complicated. You could probably figure it out without going to SEER school. So essentially, you just want to stay alive. You want to buy time. You don't want to give them any crucial information, but you don't want to do it in the way that you just say F you, give them the finger, and spit in their face, because that's probably not going to make them very happy, and you might not stay alive for very long. So that's SEER, and sorry for when you have to go through it. One of the last major blocks of SQT is jump school. And what's nice about the NSW pipeline is we now have our own jump school. So in the past, we always used to send guys out to Fort Benning, Georgia to do static line. There's a big Army course out there that would take, a month, at least 3 weeks to do static line. And apparently it was pretty brutal. So we now have jump school out right near San Diego. And you do static line in 1 week. You do 5 static line jumps. And even 1 week is a long time because there's literally nothing. There is absolutely nothing to learn to do static line. I guess I should start off by explaining the difference in static line and free fall, because I certainly didn't know this before the military, but it's very basic. So free fall is what you think of as skydiving. When you see somebody jump out of a plane, they fall in free fall, to use the word in the definition, and then they pull their parachute after they've been just falling through the sky for a while. That is free fall. Static line is like if you envision old footage of, say, World War II, where paratroopers are jumping out of planes. You see a big airplane going by in the sky, and you just see the jellyfish parachutes coming down one after another. All these paratroopers are jumping out of the plane. Their little jellyfish symmetrical round chutes are opening up. That's static line. So what static line is you have your parachute on your back. You actually have a reserve chute on your chest that hopefully you don't have to use. And the parachute on your back is hooked up to you guessed it, a static line. And when you're in the plane, you walk up to the jump master with this, think of it just like as a long, like a dog leash that's connected to your parachute that has for all intents and purposes, a carabiner or some sort of clip at the end. So when you get up in the airplane, there's a steel-braided cable running along the length of the airplane. You clip your carabiner or your static line into that. You clip it onto that steel cable. So then when you jump out, it's a very short matter of time. As soon as you jump, that leash is essentially rubber banded onto your pack, folded up onto your pack. And as you jump, it pops out of the rubber bands, it gets to the end of the leash, and it rips your parachute out of the pack. So the point of static line is all you have to do is jump out of the plane and your chute opens itself. You barely are able to fly the canopy. It's symmetrical round like that. It does slightly fly in one direction where you can aim it, but you really just jump out and you wait to hit the ground. And when you hit the ground, you do a PLF, or a parachute landing fall. Now, this is what you practice for the first 3 days of your week-long static line course. And honestly, it drove me nuts. I can't imagine going to Fort Benning and doing this for 3 weeks. You can take any reasonably competent athlete and tell them what static line is in 3 minutes and bring them up and throw them out of a plane. They're not going to be any worse prepared than someone that goes through a month-long static line course. The only thing static line is step out of a plane and then don't get hurt when you hit the ground. That's it. A parachute landing fall is, you don't have to be a parkour expert. It should be about the most instinctual thing that there is, which is, okay, I'm moving towards the ground. How should I move so that I do not get hurt? That's all it is. I don't even remember what they teach. It's like feet, calves, knees. Basically, you just hit the ground and roll, right? Your lower leg hits the ground first, then your upper leg, and then you roll onto your back. It's like, yeah, you're coming towards the ground. Don't get hurt. That's it. So that's what static line is. Now, I do not mean to downplay static line in any way, because static line was my first time jumping out of a plane, and it is fucking terrifying. Straight up. Some guys were excited for this. A few. I was absolutely terrified. And here's the other misconception that you may have. So at static line, you jump, I think we're at about 1,500 feet, 1,500 feet. And during free fall, at least when we're learning, you're jumping at about 13,000 feet. Now you might think, oh man, 13,000 feet is high. That's a lot scarier than 1,500 feet. Wrong. It is the exact opposite. The lower you are, the scarier it is, because you have no time before hitting the ground. If you jump at 1,500 feet and you have a malfunction, you got between 5 and 10 seconds to figure things out before you're hitting the ground. At least when you're high, you have time to figure things out, right? If you're unstable, you have time to get stable before you pull. If you have a malfunction, you're a lot higher up. You have a lot more time to work through it. Time is your friend in the air, and height is your friend, right? It's coming up to the ground quickly that's going to kill you. But anyway, for static line, you only do 5 jumps total. So you jump on Thursday and Friday of that week. You do maybe 2 jumps Thursday, 3 on Friday, something like that. And again, there's nothing to it. You literally just step out of the plane, your chute opens automatically, and then you do your PLF, or just don't get hurt when you hit the ground, and you're done. So static line is very much a box checking. I have never done a static line jump again in my life after completing static line course. Not sure exactly why we do it. It doesn't seem all that practical, but it's a check in the box. You did it, and you can tell stories about how terrifying that first experience was. So you finish up static line, you move directly into free fall school. Now, free fall, there's a lot more to learn because you actually have to do something here. In free fall, you jump out of the plane, obviously not hooked up with a static line. You fall for as long as you want to, and then you pull your chute. So how your chute pulls, since you don't have a static line hooked up, is you have what's called a pilot chute. And what that is it's a little miniature parachute that grabs the wind, and then that's essentially like your static line. So you have your pilot chute at the top. At the bottom of your pilot chute, there's a leash which connects that to your actual parachute that's inside your pack. So your pilot chute deploys, catches the wind, and is pulled upwards by the wind right as you're falling downwards, and pulls on that leash, tugs your parachute out of your pack, and it pops open above your head, God willing. Now, in the military, you deploy your pilot chute by pulling a handle that's on your rig. There's a ripcord that goes down and releases some pins, but not important. The point is, in the military, you pull a handle to release your chute. In the civilian world, you have the exact same pilot chute mechanism. There's not a handle. Your pilot chute is basically on your lower back, and you essentially just reach back behind yourself with your hand, grab your pilot chute, and you pitch it. You throw it out into the wind so it catches the wind and deploys. Minor difference. If you want to, after you go through military free fall school, if you want, it's very easy to convert and get your civilian parachuting license. So you've already done a bunch of jumps with the military. You just you go one day and you learn to pitch your pilot chute instead of pulling a handle, and you get a civilian license in case you want to go jump on your own on the weekends. So you have to learn, obviously, how to deploy your chute, which is pretty simple. You pull the handle. You have to once you have a good canopy overhead, you have to learn how to actually fly your chute. So you got to take your handles down out of their little holsters and fly your parachute. Right, you learn how to land, you learn how to flare so that you slow yourself down. Got to time that right, because if you flare too early, then your canopy is going to dip, and you're just going to speed up as you go into the ground. Most kind of as a side note, the majority of people that die parachuting in the civilian world, the large majority of them die because they're burning in. And what I mean by burning in is it's not because of a malfunction or their chute didn't open. Most people die parachuting because when you're coming into land, you can when you nosedive essentially your canopy, there's a technique you can do where you essentially nosedive your canopy. You go very fast because you're going almost straight down instead of riding forward with your canopy. And after you nosedive for a short period, then it balances out. It does kind of like a quarter pipe gradual motion. So kind of like an elbow joint or a rounded edge. So you go from going vertical straight down, you round out to being parallel with the ground again. And what that does is it allows you to come in on your landing with a lot of speed. That's when you see guys coming down, it looks like they're coming straight down, and then all of a sudden their chute pulls out, it levels out, and it kind of propels them, it slingshots them like really fast horizontally across the ground. You'll see guys come in and skim their feet along the grass, they'll pick their knees up, etc. And it's usually trying to do that and screwing it up where the majority of people are killed, actually. So they just don't time it well enough, or they don't judge their distance to the ground well enough, or the wind, whatever it is. And essentially they do that little maneuver a little bit too late, so their canopy doesn't have time to level out, and they just go straight into the ground before it levels out, and they get parallel to the ground. You might find it interesting, and it might actually make you feel better about your chances of dying during military free fall. In the military sense, you're not going to be swooping in like that for your landing. The most important thing you can do to stay safe in the military is, one, check your chute, pack your chute appropriately. And number two is be stable when you pull. So what I mean by be stable is, once you exit the plane, right? You want to exit with a stable body position. It depends what type of exit you're doing. You could be on a rear ramp plane. If you have a rear ramp exit, then you could dive out, which is essentially you just walk up to the edge like you're at the edge of a swimming pool and dive face first out. You could do a poised exit, which is where you walk up to the edge of the ramp, you turn around so you're facing the plane, and you just kind of step backwards. So you keep your eyes on the plane the whole time as you're going down. You could have rear ramp exit is definitely the preferred method. You just have a lot of space. It's easy. You could also have a side door exit, which is less ideal. That's actually what we learned during military free fall school, a side door exit, which is just an open door on the side of the plane. A little bit more nuanced how you have to angle your body to catch the wind. And it's also good to note that unless you're jumping out of a helicopter, which is static, when you jump out of a plane or an aircraft, you don't get that stomach dropping feeling. It's more like, think of it as riding a slide. I'd always say to myself, ride the slide, because the aircraft has a forward velocity, right? So there's an air current. So it's not just you going straight down, you're going forward and hitting forward wind resistance as well as going down. So it almost feels a bit like you're on a diagonal slide as you exit the aircraft. So when you exit, your trajectory will kind of curve in a sense, because you're going to maintain your forward velocity that you had from the aircraft, which will be relatively higher to your downward velocity at first. But as you know, acceleration of gravity is 9.8 meters per second or something like that. You guys know better than I do. But essentially, after a few seconds, eventually you're going to fall downward faster and faster until you hit terminal velocity. And then it's going to feel, in theory, in reality, you are still moving the same direction that the plane was moving, but you're falling downward so fast it just feels like you're falling straight down. So once you hit terminal velocity, it's actually easy. It's more difficult to be stable initially right out of the plane because you don't have enough vertical acceleration and thus wind resistance. So when you hit terminal velocity, you have a lot more wind resistance underneath you. It's easier to stabilize your body. And really, to have good body position, it's very simple, really. All you really have to do is keep an arch in your back and look out at the horizon in front of you. So it's very tempting to look down at the ground, right? Because you're skydiving and you're plummeting towards the ground. But when you look down, that has a tendency to arch your back, and it makes you convex instead of concave, something like that. I'm going to confuse the two of them, but instead of having an arched back, that will round your back, which is not how you want to catch the wind. So that will actually flip you over. You'll start tumbling. You might go head down. You might somersault. If you somersault like that, it's not a big deal. You could do 10 somersaults in a row. As soon as you arch your back again and look out at the horizon, and something will click in your brain, you'll remember to do that, you'll be fine. You'll stabilize. You'll pop back onto your stomach. And as I was beginning to say earlier, the most important thing for safety-wise is just to be stable when you pull. So you want to be in a good, stable, belly-down position. Your hands out in front of you, your feet behind you. Because when you're uneven, when your body's rocking back and forth, when your hands or your legs are crazy, that's when you get wrapped up in your chute, right? Your parachute is on your back. You want it to come straight up, not to touch anything, and just open up. When things get really dangerous is if you're head down, if you're flying on your back, which is not easy to do unless you're actually a good skydiver and are intentionally trying to do it. But a lot of people will be head down, will be tumbling, or will have their feet tucked way too high behind them, give you a horseshoe. So again, just take your time. Make sure you get stable. You got a nice stable flight position before you pull your parachute. Now, I went through all of the kind of specifics of how to fly or shoot, how to exit the plane, but all of that is kind of bullshit in compared to the psychology of this event. Because jumping out of airplanes holds a special place in my heart, because this is probably the most afraid of anything that I've ever been. One of the most important lessons that I learned in the military was doing things that you're afraid of. And I really I mostly got that from jumping out of planes. It was the most tangible example of directly confronting and overcoming fears that I've had in my life. And I think it's because you yourself have to make the decision to jump. You have a ton of lead time leading up to this jump to psych yourself out, right? You have to jock up down in the hangar. You watch everybody else go. You have to wait for your plane to take off to climb to altitude. And you can build up fear that whole time. And they finally get up to altitude. They roll open the door. You're just staring out at the ground. And every fiber in your body is telling you not to do this, right? It's a stupid idea. You basically kill yourself and then save your own life. And you can rationalize to yourself that you have a parachute on and you're going to be fine. But look, every fiber in your body, your amygdala does not know that you have a parachute on your back. It's looking at a 13,000-foot cliff and saying, if you jump off this, you will die. So that's a very powerful feeling. Your heart rate is spiked. Your adrenaline is pumping like crazy. And despite all of these inner primal fears, you have to be the master of your fate and the captain of your soul, so to speak. And you have to make that conscious decision to jump despite what everything else in your body is telling you to do. And that is so, so powerful of a lesson to learn. Jumping out of planes is probably a large reason that I ended up getting a master's degree in sports psychology. Because look, the first couple times that I jumped, I was terrified. You jump 20 more times, I was still pretty much terrified. But you keep doing this over and over and over again. You keep voluntarily confronting things that you're afraid of. And after a while, I'm able to go up there at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm calm the whole time, right? I'm hyper-focused. I'm in a very meditative sense. I am focusing on my breath. I'm focusing on the sensation of my feet on the floor. I'm focused on my parachute check. I check my 3 rings. I check my chest strap, my waist strap. I check my altimeter, make sure it's good to go. I'm hyper-focused on everything, every tiny detail that I need to be doing in the plane. When it's time to stand up, I stand up, right? I feel my feet on the floor. I feel my fingers pressing into the ceiling to keep my balance as I walk towards the back. And I'm not thinking about the macro. Remember when we talked about doing something difficult? The more difficult something is, the shorter your time frame should be. Just like in Hell Week, you don't think about 5 days, right? You think about 1 day at a time. You think about getting to the next meal. You think about making it through the next hour or making it through the next minute. It's the exact same thing. In this scenario, I'm not thinking about the big picture. I'm not thinking about I'm at 13,000 feet in this plane. It's pitch black and I'm jumping out. All I'm thinking about is gripping the floor, gripping the ceiling, and I'm visualizing the exact body posture that I need for a stable exit out of this plane. How am I going to catch the wind? This is a side door exit. All I'm thinking about is I'm going to dip my left shoulder, raise my right arm up, and catch the wind. I'm hyper-focused on it. Dip my left shoulder, raise my right arm. Ride the slide out of the plane. And I look at the jump master. It's my turn to jump. I jump. I have a good exit. I grab the wind. Ride the slide out. I hit terminal velocity. I'm stable the whole time. Get down to my pulling altitude. Wave off. Pull. Chute pops up. I got a good canopy. I roll my nods down. I can see the flashing light of the plane above me. I find where the other jumpers are. We begin to form up into a stack to fly back towards the DZ. And my heart rate is not going crazy, right? Maybe it's at 80 beats per minute, like a little higher than normal, but nothing, not even close to what it used to be. I thought that improvement, that progression was so cool. And I began to take that mantra of doing things you're afraid of and seeing where I could apply it elsewhere in my life. And oftentimes for me, it may not have been a physical thing, although jumping out of planes certainly was. But for me, I was a relatively shy kid growing up. I wasn't great socially. So for me, doing things you're afraid of might be talking to people. It might be social situations. It might just be saying hello to or giving a compliment to some stranger I don't know at the grocery store. It could be having uncomfortable conversations with your coworkers, with your spouse. It's just sensing that feeling that there's something I should be doing that would be good for me, but I'm hesitant to do it for one reason or another. Maybe afraid isn't the word you like to use. I like to just be humble, say you're afraid of it. Maybe you're procrastinating. You're hesitant to do it for one reason or another. You keep putting something off that if you actually did it, it would be a positive thing for you. So try to make that a habit. It starts with self-awareness, right? Realizing what would be good for you and that you're afraid of it or you don't want to do it for some reason. So once you become aware of a situation like that, start small, but practice attacking it, right? And if you're a good strategy, as simple as this seems, is 3, 2, 1, go. Just say that in your head. It could be, I have legitimately said 3, 2, 1, go to myself to go up and speak to somebody that I didn't want to talk to because I was shy or embarrassed, something like that. 3, 2, 1, go, jumping into cold water, whatever it is, whatever you don't like to do. Recognize that and start doing it. A little more eloquent way of saying that is, what you most want will be found where you least want to look. Or in the old tale of King Arthur, when they set out to search for the Holy Grail, they don't know where it is. And each of the knights enter a forest at the place that appears darkest to him. So all of these things are saying the same thing, right? If you think about it logically, you've already looked in all the easy places in your life. You've already done all the things you enjoy doing, right? By definition, that's what you do first. If you really want to make progress and improve as an individual, make it a habit to start doing the things that you're afraid of doing, that you haven't done yet. Thank you guys for listening. This was episode 5 of the Hero's Journey podcast. Next time, we're going to wrap up this 6-part series with SQT graduation, checking into a SEAL team, and what a training, workup, and deployment cycle looks like. Thanks for listening. Stay hard.